Hello and welcome to this game review. So in this one, black won a pawn quite early on and kept it, and white did not really find any good compensation for it. But we have to understand that if we do not do anything with black, eventually white might find some kind of compensation. So we should improve the position as much as possible. So let's take a look. So yeah, a3 is kind of a useless move. We can just develop properly. And now we just get a normal semi-slav, but with the move a3, which doesn't really help. The move a4, for example, might be more useful to not allow black to keep the pawn. So here, it seems black can just pick up the pawn and play g5 and b5. So here black is a pawn ahead and there's no real compensation here, but generally white sometimes plays like this. He does have the two pawns in the center. Maybe a3 is kind of useful to not allow b4 at least. Bishop e5, but this is a big time waste. It's after knight to d7. White is just giving up the bishop, who has moved for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times for a knight that has moved once. So now not only does black have the bishop pair, the pawn, but also an advantage in development. So now e5, the queen moves away. And here knight e2, bishop e7, black develops normally. But we have to understand black's main problem. And black has basically only one problem, which is this bishop on c8. So if black solves this problem, there is just nothing for white at all, as black will just be winning due to his bishop pair and the pawn advantage. So here, black's plan in this kind of structure where he has won the c4 pawn is to play bishop b7, a6 to defend this pawn, and then c5. So these are the three moves that we want to play. And once this happens, we are undoubling the pawn, so our extra pawn will become a full healthy pawn. This bishop will have been opened, which means this rook will also be able to play. So here, white really has to be accurate to not lose on the spot, as if he does nothing, for example, I don't know, knight g3, and then developing the bishop to e2, we can play a6, castles, and c5. And here, black has basically achieved everything that he wants. It's important that d5 doesn't work too well in such positions, especially if the knight is on b6. But here we can just castle queenside, which is also an idea. And all of these pawns are quite good at defending our king. Now e5 is hanging, some pins on the d file might happen. And black is more or less winning. So remember this idea of bishop b7, a6, and c5. Play it as soon as possible. So now bishop e7, the queen moves, bishop b7 happens, and the queen goes to d3, which makes sense to exchange queens, but we have to assume that white will not comply with our ideas, and the queen can actually come out to g4, where it's not particularly doing much, but after rook d1, this will be a free tempo for white to improve the rook. The king will castle, the rooks will be on f1 and d1, so white will be able to play f4, trying to pressure the pawn on f7. And finally, there is this threat actually of queen takes e6, which cannot be allowed. So instead of assuming that our opponent will help us in exchanging queens, as he did, as he is a lot lower rated, we should assume that our opponent will find the best moves. And if he did, this move will not really make much sense. Okay, now we get this endgame. And again, we have to understand black's idea that he has an extra pawn, and all of this structure for white is not very stable, and white would like to play something like b4, knight to e4, knight c5 to stabilize the structure, but we must not allow this, and the simplest move, c5 here, makes sense. If the knight takes here, we can just castle or move the rook, either way, not getting forked here, and black's pieces are all very active. The unopposed dark squared bishop will come out soon, as the pawns will be exchanged. The pawn on e5 will be hanging, so this is quite natural. For example, here as well is a variation that you showed, and white has some problems with the undeveloped rook here. There is a hanging pawn on g2 as well, if we wanted. But finally, at some point, we will start activating the pieces like this. But d2 is a strange move, as it kind of loses a pawn without gaining a tempo, because for example, if we castle, at least it takes time for white to take this pawn, right? And now it's our move again, and we can play c5. After this, now it's black to move again, and this pawn is just gone, while this rook is still here. So black plays b4, but yeah, maybe this is not the most effective idea, as it does not really open the bishop yet. So rook c2 happens, but after this, c5 is very easily played, and now finally white center falls apart. The two bishops are very powerful. We take one pawn, we take another pawn, and yeah, here white does not really have enough counterplay. We have 2 pawns up. We have this 5-on-3 majority on the king side, and once we get developed, we will have an eventual 2 passed pawns which are connected on the center. So this is more or less what happened. d3, yeah, here he cannot take the pawn, which is important because of bishop a6. But even if we lost this pawn, such a position is horrible for white, as his pieces are out of play. Our king is very active. We have the bishop pair, and we have the pawn and the weakness on b2. So there's a lot going for black. So here, black decided to exchange the rooks, which is a good idea, pushing the pawns as well. And here, even a light squared, opposite colored bishop position is also winning, because we have the more active king, and importantly, the 4-on-2 majority, which is good enough to win. And this is what happens, and black eventually won. So quite an interesting game here. Probably the thing that's most important to remember is that b4 is not specifically the most important plan here. We must play c5 as soon as possible. It doesn't really matter how, but somehow we need to play c5 for 2 reasons. One is to open up this bishop, and another is to undermine white's structure.